everyone, and welcome back to the channel to start with, and also to the realm of Soul of the Gem. Now, Soul of the Gem's warriors, as discussed in some of the other videos, are split and also showcased in the short. They are split between different segments, different warrior classes, depending on the type of design of the necklace, the pendant, and all the rest of it, the symbolic nature of each of them. And I just thought it would be nice to use this video to break down some of the established ones, in fact the 6 established types, because there's 10 altogether, 4 are yet to come, but these are the 6. To begin with, we have one that is somewhat significant to the first story and the world of Soul of the Gem in general, and you have the deer pendant, and one of the characters does utilise one of the deer pendants. I will not say which one, but in terms of colour, but if you've seen the short, then you'll already know. But the symbolism behind the deer is the idea of hunting, and by that factor, the warriors that are bound to the deer type of pendants are the ones with more ranged based weapons, usually a bow and arrow, but sometimes it can be also traded off depending on the region the warrior comes from for a crossbow, even though crossbows weren't really used as much for hunting, but it was to represent the ranged focus. And yeah, in the combat style, as they tended to be throughout history, they tended to either be the sort of ranged guards, or in a battle that's a group against another group, they tended to be the more support or the pinpoint almost medieval type sniper, which probably qualifies more for the crossbow than the bow and arrow. But their downside, as you can probably imagine, tends to be more the close quarter combat. They can still hold their own, these are magically imbued warriors after all, but it's rare, if ever, that they will actually successfully stand up one-on-one against one of the other warrior classes in a strength versus strength matchup in terms of close quarters fighting. From a distance they can deliver all sorts of strength and power, but close up, not really. It's going to be challenging for them, to say the least. But nevertheless, they do bring their own strength and power dynamic to all of this, and looking through these spirit-based warriors from a medieval period, there was no way that I couldn't include an archer or a crossbow as one of the types, because they were so prominent throughout not just European medieval history, but the entire world. And they were probably one of the longest standpoints, in particular the bow and arrow, for far longer in some cultures than just that. So that is the first pendant, and probably one of the ones that gets the most focus around it, I would say. I'm not going to say the warrior gets the most time in the book to shine, because maybe they do, maybe they don't, but the necklace itself does get a lot of focus. So that is the deer pendant and the bounding to the archers and things. Next up, we have one that does not actually make an extensive appearance, but it was thrown in as a little bit of an extra, and that is the horse pendant. And yeah, it's kind of goes without saying what kind of warriors these ones are tied to. They're tied to cavalry, which is a bit of an odd one to have as spirit-based warriors, but still a key component of history. They are the lightning chargers. They're the ones that can break up the crowds. They can, in some cases, dominate the battlefield if they don't get pinned down, but if they do get pinned down, it can go quite extensively wrong for them, without a shadow of a doubt, despite how much media likes to show sometimes different to that. They, very much like archers and things, they were a prominent case throughout history, but there's another part to them in terms of the reasoning behind why they were included and stuff like that, and that is throughout medieval history and things like that, cavalry very often in Europe and sometimes elsewhere got shown as a case of nobility. It used to be, if you take like medieval France, they tended to be the high value knights. They tended to be the dukes and things like that. So it was a sign of kind of wealth and strength that way. So having spirits tied to them when these were meant to be families that came together to ensure that this power and this magic would be able to guide their descendants, having some of those be noble families who thought about the future and things like that, it does help kind of, despite the magical elements and all that, it does kind of help ground the story in a bit and the world in a bit more realism. So, because, yeah, there were nobles out there who were absolutely selfish and things, but you also had those who did care about the legacy. They did care about what was going to happen to their children and things like that, beyond just opportunistic diplomacy and elements of that kind of ilk or cases of growing power. So, whilst they have not had a massive focus in the story so far, they were a fun one to think of and include. But next up, we are going back to one of the more significant ones to appear in the first book and the story as a whole, and that is the dragon. Now, this one and the next one are a little bit more obscure in terms of the connections they have to the warrior types. This one is connected to warriors who would go around with two-handed weapons, so like great swords, great axes and things, but specifically the bladed kind, the actual slashing and cutting type, not blunt ones. Blunt ones are something different, but these warriors were, I mean, again, kind of hand in hand with some of the blunt ones. They used to be the kind of semi-berserkers, I would say. They would go around and be able to take out all sorts. They would be the physically stronger kind of ones. I would say second only to the ones who would go around wielding like the blunt weapons. They would often not go in with like a whole lot of protection like a shield or anything like that, but which would make them absolutely vulnerable at range, but they would be very terrifying to come across and would be the more aggressive, almost bruiser type. They would be the line breakers or the flankers or things like that. That would then need the support, otherwise they could end up getting overwhelmed, and it kind of moves similarly in the story and the world. There's plenty of figures that they could go up against and completely overwhelm, but if they came across some of the warriors who were maybe faster than them, it could actually work to their detriment, which, yeah, is an interesting dynamic to look at. But they are also, you have the aggressive side, but then you also have the other side that they can also represent fiercely guarding protectors, or some people who would absolutely defend others. So they do have that balanced dynamic, but they have a undeniable ferocity when it comes to the fighting. So these warriors would bring things again like great swords, great axes, anything that has that kind of two-handed bladed area. I guess you could throw it in like a bardiche as well in that, or something of that sort. So they are, again, the close quarter foot powerhouse that is relies on their strength probably more than anything else, whilst they can also somewhat balance the aggression and the defense. They have a good measure of ferocity. So, but moving on from that, we have the next one, which again kind of falls into this dynamic of, and out of the three more to go, there's this one and another one that are again a little bit more obscure in terms of their correlation, and then there's one that actually is a bit more, I'd say, obvious in a manner of speaking, or at least in some respects it could be seen that way. But the next one is a lion, and a lion sort of doing the upward kind of claw movement. And these ones are probably, when you think of the medieval era and weaponry and things, probably one of the most bog standard in terms of layout, because they are specifically a single weapon and a shield. So sword and shield would be the most obvious. You could have axe and shield. You could have maybe a blunt weapon and a shield as well, like a one-handed mace or something. But these are the real all-rounders in terms of this. They are the ones who do the most holding the line kind of, and just the straight up, not brawler, but proper, almost refined fighter. They have the defense through the use of the shield. They have the aggression blade. They are the warrior that is the mostly focused around balance, and don't need to say throughout history in all sorts of different cultures the amount of times that you saw sword and shield or axe and shield wielding warriors. They were always the front line. The shield wars from like the Saxon and Viking periods, they were the ones who you could rely on to hold the line. And again, it reflects in the world of Soul. I'm not going to list the characters who maybe are connected to this or may not be, but they do fight and they do tackle, but they also can be seen as more of a battlefield, I don't want to say commander, but they can be relied on the more tactical awareness element as well. So they can hold firm, they can stand, and yeah, they are the real case of, with the exception of ranged combat, obviously, they are in terms of the melee balance, they are the jack of all trades but master of none. And that is probably the best way to describe them. And it means that they can hold their own against various other warriors. Doesn't mean that they'll go in and win, but they can hold their own against several of them, and they will come out on top in some of those engagements, but it would be fairly even and depending very much on the scenario at hand, and also the energy levels of both the warrior and the spirit descendant that they are bound to or tied to. And yeah, they are the real case of sort of medieval tradition in terms of their styling and armaments and areas like that. So a nice little dynamic, but not a massive amount to really go into about them apart from what I've just listed. But now we're going into the other one that I like to think is a bit more of an obvious one when I explain it, but I know that it may not be. But it's a helmet that has some form of resemblance to an old hoplite type helmet. So a bit before the medieval period, but they their whole focus is around pole arms. So very much halberds. There might be a pike or other weapons of that kind of range in there as well, but it's primarily halberdier type weapons and things like that. But they are the unshielded defender is probably the best way to say it. They take the element that the dragon warrior has in terms of the guarding and they take it to the next level. They are physically strong. They are the brick wall is the best way of saying it, but unlike the lion, they don't rely on their shield to do it. They rely purely on their skill and their strength. And usually another dynamic to these, with the exception of maybe the horse cavalry ones, because obviously there's the person and the horse, they are probably the tallest standing of some of these warriors, which helps with like the intimidation factor of you will not get past me or things like that. And because of their skill at defense, they can be seen usually taking on greater numbers. Sometimes they can be the chief warriors. They can also get locked into unarmed brawls if the need arises, or if their weapon is tied down or something. They are the relentless defender of any of them. And but again, like the dragon, they do have the vulnerability of having no shield protection or things, which does make them vulnerable at range. But it's also important to remember that these are effectively immortal warriors. Like it can happen, but it's quite rare that they do the spirit fully fades or they die. But in terms of the combat, if they're trying to protect another person or something like that, then these dynamics can still shine through, because whilst they might be alright, who they're protecting may not be. So, and yeah, their armour tends to be similarly balanced to the likes of the dragon. They're not extensively heavily armoured, but they're not light either. They tend to be quite medium, so they still have the semblance of mobility if they need it. They are... The best way of describing it is they're the shieldless tank of the Soul of the Gem universe. They will absolutely hold the line for as long as they need to, or as long as they can. And yeah, in terms of just quickly covering over the ones we've gone through strength-wise, in terms of the last three, I'd say strength-wise, in terms of raw physical strength, the lion warriors are the lowest of these three. Then it's probably I would say actually the dragon, and then the ancient helm warriors, because halberd weapons tended to be more, a lot of the time, not all the time, they tended to be larger. But I guess you could also argue the point that a big thing about the two-handed bladed is that the weight would... Sometimes it was really well balanced, but other times if it was unwieldy, the weight would be on one end. So you could make that debate as well. The strength for both of them kind of balances out. as it does for also the blunt weapon ones, which are not in this video. They'll be in the next one. But we have that being the present. And then to conclude, we have the Crowned Eagle warriors, who out of all of them actually keep the most resemblance to the lions. Only instead of a one-handed sword or axe or anything like that, their one-handed weapon is far more specific. It is a spear. The other renowned medieval weapon that you see throughout cultures all around the world. The ancient weapon, the Stone Age, ancient, medieval, even cultures beyond that. And they bear a lot of resemblance to the lion, although there are some keen differences. The first keen difference between them is that they tend to be faster, and the reason for that is the weight and the armour tends to be a bit lighter, but at the exact same time they tend to have the broader shield and the bigger mobility, so they are the moving defender. They're not as sluggish or broad as the ancient helm, but they can rely more on their mobility. But again, they are the warrior where in a group combat, if they saw an opening or one of the opponent warriors or enemies of any sort basically trying to exploit a gap or a flank, they'd be the first ones to rush in and fill the line. In that kind of lineup, they have the skill, they have a pretty good reach, not as much as some of the others, but they do have a good reach with the spear. But obviously the other part and the downside to it is a spear, whilst skilled in things, doesn't have the same sort of... It can have a slashing ability, but it's nowhere near as effective as like a sword or an axe, so they can hold the line, but they are far more reliant on pinpoint strikes and their mobility than they are being able to actually stand up in a full-blown strength on strength one. But again, like the rest of the warriors, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't give it a good go, it's just it wouldn't necessarily work in their favour. But they do keep to that fast-paced nature, and they can hold their own, they can be skilled, and yeah, because it's one of those elements that when people think about spears or in elements of media, they tend to just think of the jabbing, and yeah, it is one of the primary functions, but there were likely far more functions to it as well than just that. It's just maybe not as effective as some other weapons. Because the other part of it is they do have the shield, which does help with the defense, but they can also defend with just the spear. It's just, it may not be as effective. But yes, I am going to be perfectly honest. The reason why I've sort of breezed through this a bit, not hastily, but at a pretty steady pace today instead of going far into the depths. One is there's still more development coming, so there will be additions, so this is more of a sort of basic lineup of it. But the other part is I don't know how much is coming across in the mic until I check the edit, but I've been hit by like seasonal allergy type stuff, probably worse than I have been in the last few years, so that has slowed up the recordings a little bit. But I did want to get some of them done, and this was one of them, as it does tie into some of the other stuff that's going on as well, and hopefully coming soon. But yes, so I am going to conclude this video here. It is nice to be doing another recording again. I've said that like it's been weeks, it hasn't, but still. Please do comment, like and subscribe. If you would like to pick up a copy of Soul of the Gem or any of the other books, you can check the Payhip and the Ko-fi links in the description. You can check the social medias, the Instagram, the TikTok, the Discord, if I remember to add the link in, and the Facebook page. But until next time, welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Philomine books.